We are reading chapter 9 of The Crossroads. Monday morning started with a beep from Tomas's phone. Cell reception on the ranch was spotty. Sometimes it took hours to get notice of a voice message. Text messages tended to arrive more promptly, but a 1-minute call from Guatemala contained a lot more information than a single text possibly could. Without talking, Jamie and Tomas got out of bed and walked the phone over to Angela's bedside, where they got the best reception. The phone said it was 4:36. The sky remained so dark it seemed impossible to think of the sun would ever return. Tomas's phone didn't say when the message had been sent, just that there was a new voice message. Jamie swallowed. The message could have been sent a few minutes ago or several hours. Tomas held out his phone on speaker. Jamie and Angela crowded around it, their heads touching each other in their attempt to get close as possible. Mama's voice filled the trailer as she rushed to say everything in 60 seconds or less. Your father has been promoted to supervisor at the chocolate plantation, so hopefully we'll have money to use the village computer for a Skype date soon. I'm taking care of baby Kiko 3 days a week so Rosita can work the cash register at the store. You wouldn't believe how big he's gotten. Angela, your mama said to remind you that you're a young lady and to act accordingly. Both your mama and papa send their love and hope to add credit to the phone soon. Abuela, though, is not so good, not being able to get out of bed with her broken hip and refusing to eat. She keeps saying she's lived a good life. She might not be with us for much longer. We'll let you know if something changes. Love you all. And the phone went dead. She'd paid for only 1 minute of phone time, and Jamie guessed she didn't have the extra coins to make the call last longer. Tomas replayed the message to hear her voice again. Jamie knew because he wanted the same thing. She might not be with us much longer. We'll let you know if anything changes. Love you all. Tomas pressed the button to save the message while Jamie collapsed on Angela's bed. It couldn't be true. Not when so many people loved her, counted on her. If the Alphas hadn't treated her, or threatened and pushed her, Abuela wouldn't be having a broken hip and be left stranded in bed. If Jamie and Angela hadn't left, they wouldn't have threatened her. However, he looked at it. The blame came back to haunt him. Tomas shook his head as if he could change the news. If Abuela is in pain, if she's suffering, then maybe it's best if she... But he wasn't able to finish his thought. Jamie glanced at Angela, who scrunched her covers in her arms against her chest for comfort. She never said goodbye, Angela sniffled. We never said goodbye. The morning they had left Guatemala, Abuela had cooked them a feast, not as elaborate as Dona Chichi's, but with food that they had on hand and all the love she had to offer. Considering the potential danger of their journey when it came time for them to leave, Abuela had walked away not wanting or not being able to see them off. Now, if it came to it, they were the ones unable to say goodbye. Tomas put his arm around both of them as the three of them cried on each other's shoulders. Vito walked across the bed to join the huddle, licking each of their arms, unable to kiss away their tears. She's not gone yet, Jamie reminded them. She's so tough, she could live for years. Or minutes. Their grandmother always did what she set her mind to. And as much as she wasn't someone to give up, Jamie had never known her to change her mind. If she didn't get out of bed, if she didn't have anything to keep her busy, then she would feel useless. She'd never had patience for lazy people. They tried calling Tio Daniel, Angela's papa, but just as it had for the other millions of other times, the phone rang and rang. Tomas even tried to ring the payphone in the village Mama had called from, but that one too received no answer. In Guatemala, it was 5:58 a.m. There's nothing we can do but respect and accept your choice, Tomas said as he made instant coffee. Respect and accept. Jamie heard the faltering of his brother's words, and they were as empty as he felt. As far away as his family was, Jamie always thought they'd still be there, in the same house, in the same village, just a phone call away, even if it took a while to get credit. But just as with Maguel, there would be no cell phone reception in heaven. Did Tomas receive any calls during the day? After an endless day at school, the worry released a tiny bit of as Jamie got to the question which had been nagging him all day. Don pulled his horse to a stop where the bus had left Jamie seconds before and lifted his battered cowboy hat. Not while we were together, and we were in the barn with the calves most of the day. He removed his foot from the stirrup and held out his hand, his strong, weathered hand. Jamie grasped it and swung his leg over the horse's back. After a few days of riding, he no longer kicked the gelding when mounting, though he still wasn't able to get on the horse on his own. Abuela is not doing very well, Jamie explained, though Don hadn't asked. Mama thinks she might, but just as Tomas didn't want to talk about it this morning, Jamie couldn't say it out loud either. I heard. But you have to remember this is not always a bad thing. Of course it's a bad thing. She'd be gone. In his frustration, he squeezed the horse's sides. The gelding leaped into a gallop, which had Jamie hanging on to Don's waist for dear life. The old man gathered the horse up in a few strides and returned him to a walk within seconds. Jamie's ears pounded with the sound of his heartbeat. It took several deep breaths to ease his hold. A fatal accident might not be the best way to get to see Abuela again. I never had much use for church and people telling me how to think, Don said, but I believe a body is just a vessel for the soul, and like any container, it's prone to deteriorating. A soul, however, can never die. It lives forever in the world and in the people it touched. A part of her is in you, and that part you'll keep forever, whatever happens. As much as Jamie wanted to, he found no contradiction to Don's words. Better than, at least she won't continue suffering, or she'll be in a better place. Empty words that would have left him hollow. I hate being here, so far away from everything and everyone I love. I just want to go home to my family. Don reached behind him and patted Jamie on the knee. I left Mexico because I had no one. I didn't think of it at the time, but I came looking for a family and found it in the people I met. You have a family in Guatemala, but that doesn't mean you can't have a family here too. Except Jamie didn't want anyone else. His family was perfect the way it was. Back when Miguel was alive and Tomas lived at home and the world seemed simple. I still want to see her, talk to her, Jamie grumbled at the cowboy's back. Don pulled his horse to a stop on the top of the ridge that gave them a sweeping vista. The cloudless blue sky and the brown land stretched to infinity with nothing but scattered vegetation to interfere. From here you can see anything, talk to anyone, Don said as he took a deep breath of the dry desert air. Jamie slid off the horse's back and sat on a boulder. He turned his gaze to the south and imagined he could see beyond the cacti and the juniper bushes, past the Rio Bravo, and through Mexico, where the land changed from desert to jungle, over the rivers and into Guatemala, until he could see a patio surrounded by individual rooms, his tio's house, where Abuela lived. He saw into the kitchen, and Abuela's hunched back as she rolled out tortillas. She turned around, gnarled hands tossing a ball from one to the other. her gray hair pulled into a bun at the nape of her neck, and her dark eyes bright and proud. Her voice cracked as it did when she was tired, but she wanted to pretend she wasn't. Hola, abuela, he replied to the figure in his mind. They stood there in the kitchen for minutes, or even hours, with only the ball moving from one hand to the other. You know it's time, right? She said. He shook his head no, trying to clear his mind. He could choose what he wanted to happen, what he wanted her to say, but Abuela always did what she wanted, even in someone else's imagination. You can't change that. I won't let you go, he insisted. He had forced his mind to think of her saying that she was getting better, that she was happiest staying with her family, that she wasn't going to leave them. But just as before, she wrote her own script. You don't need to worry about me. I'm where I want to be. I love you. She tossed him the ball, and the image began to fade. No, Abuela, please don't. Abuela! Jamie found himself back on the ridge, clutching a small rock in his fist. He stood and flung the rock with all his might toward the house in the Guatemalan jungle. Instead, it flew a bit before landing on the rocky ground, scaring a blackbird into the sky to circle above his head. Once out of his hand, he realized his mistake and scrambled to get the rock back. He picked it up again and held it to his face. It didn't take too much imagination to think it smelled a little bit like corn tortilla. He placed it next to his sketchbook in his backpack. He got back on the horse without any help from Don, nudged the gelding to walk down the other side of the ridge. Neither said anything for the rest of the ride. They crossed over a small hill and the homestead came into view. A giant dust cloud traveled at breakneck speed down the road and away from the ranch. Tomas in his truck. Jamie waved to his brother in the distance, silently begging him to come back. But the other continued racing until only dust remained. Quinto, the other ranch hand, sat on a bench outside the barn, listening to a football game on the radio instead of working. Where did Tomas go? Jamie asked as Don steered them into the barn. The ranch hand shrugged his shoulders and fiddled with the knobs of the dusty radio for better reception. Who knows? Got a call and left. A call? Jamie's breath caught in his throat. It was probably nothing. Other people called Tomas when the reception was good. Mr. George checking in to see that the calves were all healthy. The feed store saying the specialty order shipment had come in. Or kids wanting to raise a steer for the agricultural fair. But none of them made Tomas drive off like Wile E. Coyote on fire. Did he speak to a person in English? Jamie asked. Don't know, Spanish maybe. I wasn't paying attention. Quinto shouted at the radio, where the referee had just given the opposite teams a penalty. Jamie tumbled off the horse and crumbled to the ground from weak legs. Instead of dusting himself off, he hugged his knees and tried to look at the horizon, as he had from the ridge, but the hills were in the way. Don dismounted from the grace of the feather floating to earth and handed the horse's reins to Quito. Untack him and offer him some water. Then give him a good brush and rub down before offering more water. Quinto crossed his arms over his barrel chest and gave the old man a glare. Do I look like your groom? Do you have anything better to do? Don gave him a look. Quinto took the reins with a huff, raised the radio's volume, and led the horse to the tack room. Don watched his gelding clop away before placing a hand on Jamie's head. His old joints made it hard for him to crouch down. Jamie leaned into the bony legs and sniffed. You said goodbye on the ridge. Jamie nodded, but his mouth remained dry as the desert surrounding him. Then she knows she was loved and cared for. Yeah, she knew. Everyone who knew Abuela loved her. or at least respected her, except those alpha gang members. They beat a 12-year-old boy to death as if it were nothing. They had no conscience about harassing an old lady, shoving her down the steps so that she broke her hip and was left with no life to live. Where was the justice? How had God allowed these things to happen? He stayed on the dirt, with Don patting his head and the football match crackling in the old radio. When he finally shifted, the rancher offered a strong hand to help him up. Jamie hugged his bag to his chest. Inside, he could feel the rock from the ridge and the edges of his sketchbook, his safety blanket. It had been Abuela who had bought him his first sketchbook when he was 5 or 6. Before that, he had scavenged for loose bits of paper, drawing on receipts and inside food boxes. A vendor at the market, where Abuela sold her tortillas, was about to throw away 2 unlined notebooks that had been damaged by the rain. In exchange for a half-dozen tortillas, Abuela came home with 2 books for Jamie, telling him to draw the world. When he got back to the trailer, he decided he would draw a portrait of her so that when he was as old as Dawn, he'd still remember what she looked like. You mentioned the other day, Jamie's voice rasped and choked as he struggled to talk to the old rancher. Then it was when it was your time to go, you ride into the sunset and disappear. Don stopped walking and turned to Jamie with a smile. His teeth were yellow, worn down, and crooked, but all remained intact. And I told you, I'm not riding away anytime soon.